We all know Slaanesh is one of the Chaos Gods in Warhammer 40K that represents hedonism, obsession, and the pursuit of perfection at all costs. Slaanesh corrupts by exploiting desires, whether for beauty, power, art, or physical sensations. It whispers promises of unparalleled pleasure and fulfillment, drawing individuals into a spiral of indulgence and excess. Over time, these temptations twist its followers, eroding their morality and turning them into slaves to their cravings. This corruption affects not only individuals but entire cultures and races, dragging them into depravity and decadence until they are utterly consumed by Slaanesh's influence. So when we think of what Slaanesh represents and who she corrupts, we obviously think of the godlike physiques of the Adeptus Custodes, the sensual appeal of the Sisters of Battle, or the provocative bodies of the Demonettes of Slaanesh. What you don't think about is the Tyranids. Even if the Prince of Pleasure himself corrupted the bioforms of the Great Devourer, there is no way that the Tyranids could be made to look good. What? I guess I was wrong. Slaanesh Tyranids do exist. But do they really look like this? The answer is unfortunately no, because although Slaanesh is connected to physical beauty, the gifts of the Dark Prince are much more than that. Now, the first thing I want you guys to understand is that chaos corruption of the Tyranids is not your typical form of corruption. Most commonly, when we look at humanity's devotion to the ruinous powers, there is a consciously minded individual that seeks out the patronage of a chaos god. They either give up their soul, venerate the god, or work to further the schemes of this chaotic patron. However, this evil journey that a corrupted individual takes is usually triggered by a deception of chaos. For example, in the case of Nurgle worshippers, they accept the relief from pain that Nurgle gives them, but that pain was caused by the disease of Nurgle. In the case of Tzeentchian worshippers, their thirst for knowledge of sorcery is only created when Tzeentch gives them information that would otherwise not be available to them in the first place. And in all of these cases, there is a deliberate pact between the god and the individual where the traitor receives a chaotic gift he is looking for in exchange for the acceptance of the ruinous powers. Now, this common style of embracing the demonic can only really be done by sentient beings with free will, because it's a true devil's bargain, and in the case of the Tyranids, they don't have free will. I'll use the example that I have in my Nurgle Tyranid lore video, where the hive mind protects and denies a bioform from turning to Nurgle even when the disease is running rampant inside their bodies and they're in terrible pain. It's the hive mind that actually controls the Tyranid. However, even though there is no way that a Tyranid bioform can consciously embrace chaos and become a traditional chaos cultist where he is devoted to a chaos god, there is still chaotic corruption in the form of the trigger that was placed there by the chaos god to try to force a creature into his service. In the case of Nurgle, it's easy to understand because it's the warp disease, but when you deal with the Prince of Pleasure Slaanesh, the initial seed of corruption is harder to see. On the very rare occasion when Slaanesh sets his attentions on a Tyranid hive fleet, the Prince of Pleasure extends his gifts to these truly alien creatures, not in the hopes of turning the entire hive fleet to chaos, but rather using the Tyranids as a tool to create even more wickedness and indulgence, basically what feeds him. And he does this by enhancing the perceivable satisfaction a bioform can obtain through the act of fighting the enemy. Let me explain. The majority of Tyranid bioforms run on instinctive behaviors. These primitive actions are comparable to what we credit our reptilian brain for doing. Things like controlling our breathing, our heart rate, and basic fight and flight responses. When Slaanesh finally gets a hold of a Tyranid bioform, the first gift he bestows upon his victim is the ability to expand his mind and enhance what would be considered the limbic system to us, which controls emotions, memory, and complex senses. It's not that the hive mind didn't give bioforms these faculties, because Tyranids need the ability to smell their prey, to form memories in order to return back to the correct mycetic spore. It's that these things are enhanced to a level where the Tyranid can experience a true sense of indulgence. For example, a Hormagaunt is bred to seek and kill any living creature with its long-bladed talons. That's its role. It has no other desire but to kill. When it gets influenced by Slaanesh, the mind of the Hormagaunt is altered in a way that it intensifies the creature's sensory perceptions, giving it a sense of euphoria from the evisceration of the enemy. In other words, the Hormagaunt becomes hypersensitive to sight, sound, and touch, allowing it to find a new sense of satisfaction unlike anything it's felt before, as its scything talons rip through the flesh of its victims, and he finds true enjoyment in ending this creature's life. And in a strange way, Slaanesh's corruption of a Tyranid actually makes them deadlier. They get a boost of chemicals and hormones surging through their mind and body unlike anything they have felt before. It's almost like a tiny evolutionary leap forward that then makes them become addicted to figuring out new ways of butchering the enemy and trying to prolong the process as much as their primordial brains can resist. Now, the reason the God of Excess can do this is because, like most biological life, the Tyranids already have these natural mechanisms that reward aggression and violence. For example, the adrenal glands found in most infantry bioforms serve to push a Tyranid into a hyperactive state of frenzy, and then once corrupted by Slaanesh, this gets placed into overdrive. We can think of these chaotic mutations of the body and mind of the Tyranids similar to a human on bath salts or some type of intense, almost hallucinogenic drug. In other words, Slaanesh corrupted Tyranids are basically just Tyranids on acid. And although the bioform is experiencing its life through this new tinted lens of wonder, the sensation doesn't really last forever, and it becomes its new goal to attain that same level of pleasure in the next kill. And as the kills begin to accumulate, the Tyranid requires ever more extremes of sensation in order to feel that same initial burst of euphoria, basically becoming addicted not just to the act of butchering, but to absorbing as much of the essence of death dealing. So the taste of a victim's panic sweat, the warmth of its organs as it's ripped out of its body, the sound of the screams, even the intensity of the colors displayed on a gore-splattered battlefield. The Tyranid is not just a simple-minded bioform anymore, it is now a death junkie. And again, because the individual bioform is fulfilling its role as a killer, the hive mind is tied down. It might detect that there's something different with this particular hive guard or a termagant, but it's still doing its job. And what begins to happen is that the bioform engages in ever more extreme behavior, chasing that initial high while feeding the Prince of Pleasure. And so even though there is no technical veneration of Slaanesh, the god actually grants these Tyranids ever more mutational gifts in order to drive the Tyranids further down into depravity. Now, these chaotic mutations take many forms, but the most common gift of Slaanesh are crab-like and barb-scything talons designed to wound more so than kill, lymphatic glands that secrete a substance with a hormone-triggering odor meant to stimulate other Slaaneshi Tyranids, sensory receptors that extend out and feed the Tyranid's mind with ever more sensations, multiple eyes that push the boundaries of visual perception, wild and bizarre color patterns, as well as mutating the chitinous armor into elegant and elaborate designs. And then there are the gifts that are not really tangible, like the urge to collect trophies from their victims. The Tyranid indulges in not only growing their stockpile, but also finding satisfaction in recalling the murderous act. And the severity of the mutation really depends on how long Slaanesh is allowed to corrupt the bioform, because once the hive mind has had enough, the bioform is ordered back into a reclamation pool to be cleansed of his mutations and become nothing more than biomass. But to the bitter end, Slaanesh feeds off of the final moments of orgasmic pleasure that the bioform experiences as its body dissolves into nothingness. But that's how I see Slaanesh corrupting the Tyranids. If you guys think it would look different, let me know in the comment section below. And if you're curious about what Nurgle would do to the Tyranids, click the link to the next video. It's going to show you Nurgle Tyranids. I hope you guys are enjoying these videos. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Put my freedom first.